Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for inviting me to talk today. I'm speaking from Kinross. That's not Kinloss, as in the RAF say. Kinross is about half an hour north of Edinburgh in the southern part of Perthshire. Beautiful part of the world. We're very close to the stunning Loch Leven, where there's a castle where Mary Queen of Scots was imprisoned for quite a long time. So it's a beautiful part of the world. It's peeing with rain today, so what's new for Scotland? First of all, I'd like to say congratulations to Amy and all your staff for the Op Entertain. I think it's been a great initiative, and it's been fun looking at some of the things that you're doing. The day I left the army, I joined SAFA, and I've been a SAFA volunteer for 20 odd years. And so I looked at the RAFA Op Connect initiative and joined that as well. And I've got two lovely people that I telephone to keep in touch with them. So it's been a terrific initiative, and well done. I'd like to acknowledge two people. There's a German gentleman, I'll explain about him later on, called Christoph, who I hope is going to join today, and a local professor called David Munro, who helped me on this, this project. Today's talk is a nice follow-on really from Chris Goss's excellent talk about night fighters yesterday. This is more of a detective story really in some respects, a sort of human interest story rather than actually a, if you like, a military history talk, but I hope you find it interesting. And Amy, when you're ready, could we have the first picture up, please? Although I was 33 years in the army, my dad was army, my grandfather was army, I've got a serving son who's army, I have a little bit of light blue blood running through me as well, which you'll be pleased to hear, because my mother, and you can see where I get my good looks from, my mother was in the WWII in the Second World War, and you can see by her dates, she was only about 21, 22. She was Aircraft Woman Class 1, Jacqueline Clark. And I, not that long ago, sent away for her medal and wondering if the war medal had ever been claimed, and it hadn't. And so I was sent this war medal for her with her name on the obverse, which is lovely. And she had two very interesting sisters. There were three sisters, and one of them was infamous in some respects for being sacked by Douglas Bader for coming back late from a long weekend during the war. And he didn't take any nonsense. He just sacked her. He just fired her there and then. He did an Alan Sugar, "You're fired." And so she went off to some other job, but she was in his outer office and finding it fascinating before she was sacked. The other sister was one of these amazing women, lady pilots, who are unusual then because they transported planes from one airfield to another, not in combat, but they had to fly all sorts of different planes from different aerodromes to different aerodromes. So that's my RAF pedigree. This story really starts from a gentleman called Christoph in Villach. And those of you who know your Germany will be familiar with the western side of Germany, North Rhine-Westphalia. And to get your bearings, you see Krefeld on the top of this map. Mönchengladbach is just at the bottom, and Düsseldorf is in the east there. And a gentleman called Christoph Hayes, a lovely man who brews beer in Villach, which is a town of about 50,000 population, got in touch with us in Kinross and said he's trying to find the relatives of the 5 members of a Wellington bomber which was shot down in the early part of the war. One of them is a gentleman called Andrew Downey. And so today, this is the story of Andrew Downey, who was killed in action when his Wellington bomber crashed. And I'll come back to the detective story later and how we actually set about finding Andrew's story, Andrew's family. So Pilot Officer Andrew Downey was shot down in April 1942. He was only 21. And let's hear a little bit about Andrew. Who was this young man? Well, he was born here where I live in 1920 in Kinross. He was a talented young man. He went to school in Dollar Academy, which is a lovely private school not far from where I'm sitting today. He was a talented footballer. He had a trial for Aberdeen Football Club, so it shows you how good he was in those days as a young man. And he went to work for General Accident Insurance, as it was called then, in Perth. He had 3 younger sisters, Margaret and Nettie, and they're both still alive. Margaret's now 88, and she lives about 300 yards from where I'm sitting. And Nettie is 96 and lives in London. Father was the local postie, and when war was declared, Andrew didn't wait to be called up, he volunteered. And so well done, Andrew, he volunteered. This is him on the right there, playing cricket for Kinross, or learning to play cricket, Kinross Cricket Club. And his dad, Robert, was the local postie. And Kinross is a smallish town, and in those days, it was probably 7,000 or 8,000 people. But everybody would know the postie, everybody would know his family, and pretty much everybody would know Andrew, the son of the postie. So Andrew, and there's his what I call a regimental number, joined the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve. He enlisted a place that I'd never heard of called RAF Padgate in Lancashire. And he did his training in number 10 operational training unit at RAF Abingdon. My brother Paul, who's also ex-army, is listening today, and he and I both did some parachute training at RAF with great fear and trepidation. He's got horrendous memories for us. But RAF Abingdon is where Andrew went and did some of his training. And then very interestingly, he was sent to Canada, where the RAF had set up number 31 bombing and gunnery school in RAF Picton. So a couple of pictures, first of all, of RAF Padgate in Lancashire, which looks like the entrance to most military camps. And then here's one, an aerial one of RAF Abingdon. And you can see what a large base it was. And I suspect the pictures, the houses in the foreground are probably the officers' quarters. And then at about your 3 o'clock, what looks to me like either the officers and or the sergeant's mess, the hangars beyond that, and then the airfield beyond that, a big base. And very interestingly then, there's a little map of Canada here. If you look at bottom left of your picture, first of all, you can see and get your bearings from Canada and the province of Ontario. And then looking at the bigger picture, in the bottom right of Ontario, the RAF set up this extraordinary custom-built base, which was to be RAF Picton, custom-built on top of a plateau. And there, they set up this the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. And the airfield was built on a high plateau overlooking Picton, and it was called number 31 Bombing and Gunnery School, specially opened in April 1941. And I guess that was to protect it from, as a training base, possible bombings by the Luftwaffe over United Kingdom. They created 5 bombing ranges, and you can see there the types of aircraft that flew out of that base. And they basically ran people through a 6-week course in bombing, navigation, and air gunnery. Now, our friend Andrew very cleverly received the trophy for the most accurate bombing student, and he received his trophy. And I'll show you a picture of that trophy later on because it's still in existence. But I'd just like you to read, you might not be able to read, but the group captain said on the sort of passing out and the prize giving, "Be careful in wearing the sergeant's stripes you've just received. You are now in a position of responsibility. Be an example to those of lower rank. Your Air Observer badge ranks as a decoration. It is public recognition that you are skilled in bomb dropping. Upon the accurate and careful working of your brain depends the safety of the aircraft crew. Develop a calm, methodical mind. Be supermen, as many who are serving in operations over Europe are today," said the group captain. And he awarded our Andrew, who was then a sergeant, that trophy. Andrew was then promoted from sergeant to pilot officer. And I might ask RAF advice here, because I've never quite understood why you could have a pilot officer as the observer, and then you see at the bottom there, his actual pilot of the Wellington was a sergeant pilot, Winkle. I've never quite understood this, the distinction between sergeant pilots, commissioned officer pilots, and maybe somebody could help me with that at the end. Anyway, he was posted to 158 Squadron RAF Driffield, which is in the West Riding of Yorkshire in April 1942. There's 158 Squadron's in badge, whatever you call it in the RAF. I presume it's a badge, and it's 158 Squadrons was strength in unity. And here's an aerial picture of RAF Driffield with its cross runways, and you can see there that it's quite a substantial base, and it's a large base. And you'll see now some pictures of the hangars. The crews here look like they are waiting for some kind of inspection by a senior officer. And it gives you will all know this much better than me, being RAF people mostly, but the Wellington was a massive bomber, single, 2 engines, but huge. And I got some photographs of air crew. I'm not saying these are Andrew Downey's crew, of course, but it gives you an idea of there's a crew of 5 kitting up top left to get into their Wellington. And there's the poor chap with a dreadful job, bottom left, of doing the navigation. And what strikes me in particular on the bottom right picture is that the pilot looks about 14 years old. They're all so young. It's unbelievable. You'll recall that Andrew is 21. But the youth of these people who went on these terrifying missions was quite extraordinary, what they did. And I think all of us are in awe of what they actually went through. And here we are loading up, unusually a color photograph, loading up these enormous bombs. Probably quite a tricky job to get right and make sure that they'd been loaded onto the bomber properly. And some shots of crews getting ready for a mission, and crews getting a briefing, probably a meteorological and targeting briefing. Bottom left looks like a navigation planning exercise ready for the night's operations. And then bottom right actually getting kitted up for the frightening mission that was about to come their way. Here's a Wellington. It's not the one. It's not Andrew's Wellington, but a really beautiful aircraft in my view. A lovely aircraft. And I'd like you to focus in now on the target of Andrew's mission. The target was going to be Dortmund, and you'll see it's in the western part of Germany. And just narrowing down a little bit, get your bearings. A lot of you will know this part of the world. It's in the eastern part of the very, very heavily populated and busy industrial heart of Germany, which was the Ruhr. And the Ruhr River flows through Dortmund, and you can see it's east of Essen. It's slightly north and east of Düsseldorf, and only about 40 or 50 miles from the Dutch border. Looking now to Village, and where our friend Christoph lives now, and this is where the crash was to happen. So, tuning in, there's Village itself, and you can see how close it is to the Dutch border. This is Dortmund today, beautiful big city of 600,000 souls on the eastern part of the Ruhr, obviously totally rebuilt now. But the targets in Dortmund were the oil plants, the refineries, the storage depots, big strategic targets which the RAF were looking to destroy. Just as a matter of historical, on the 12th of March 1945, this is 3 years later than our particular story, 1,100 aircraft dropped 4,800 tons of bombs on poor old Dortmund. And it wasn't until April 1945 that actually we had what I call boots on the ground arrived in Dortmund, and the United States 95th Infantry Division actually entered and took Dortmund itself. So you can see that Dortmund today, totally rebuilt, beautiful, classically German inner Stadt that those of us who've served in Germany will recall. And here's the Wellington, a pictorial view of it dropping its bombs on its terrible mission. And I'm afraid to say this is the destruction that was caused, and I'm not going to go there with the whole Bomber Harris type arguments, but it really is an appalling view of what I've just shown you before of Dortmund today, and the sort of mission that Andrew was ordered to go on and totally flatten and destroy, obviously not only the strategic targets, but unwittingly large numbers of the population too. And you can see the sort of aerial view of the destruction. This won't be a surprise to you, but it just brings us into focus of the sort of destruction that was caused. Only this January, amazingly enough, 2 enormous 250-pound bombs were discovered I think in the city centre. And of course, they had to call in the bomb disposal boys from Dortmund to remove them and evacuate the population while they were removed safely. And who knows if they might have been Andrew's bombs, I don't know. But it shows you that people are still finding things like this. And when I've taken battlefield tours to the Western Front on the land battles, you can still go to many parts of the Western Front and pick up bits of, well, carefully, pick up bits of shrapnel, and you can still find unexploded munitions. And it's called the Iron Harvest on places like the Somme and Passchendaele, where still to this day, 23 people a year roughly are killed by unexploded munitions. Anyway, back to the Second World War. So what actually happened in our story to Andrew Downey, our young man, our pilot officer? Well, they took off from RAF Driffield in Yorkshire at 10:22 at night. So this was to be a large-scale night attack on Dortmund on Tuesday, the 14th of April, going into Wednesday, the 15th of April. And on that attack, that particular night, the RAF was to lose 25 bombers. On return, and we do know that it did drop its bombs, Wellington Zulu 8490 November Papa from 158 Squadron, Andrew Downey's bomber, was shot down and crashed near the Dutch border at Villach. And this is returning to the story where I started. Now, I don't know whether it was shot down by one of Chris's night fighters from from yesterday's talk, or whether it was shot down by ground-based flak. Who knows? We don't know. I suspect it was probably the latter, probably from air defenses from the ground, but we just don't know. The plane went up in flames, and an enormous explosion set a gentleman called Jacob Nilgis' farm afire, and he burnt the house to the ground. And not that long ago, Christoph sent me a photograph of the farm as it is today. So on this particular operation, bombing Dortmund, the RAF lost 17 bombers. They were part of an enormous group of 208 aircraft. 142 of those were Wellingtons, 34 were Hamdens, 20 were Sterling bombers, 8 were Halifax, and 4 Manchester. So a massive raid. And at that time, it was the largest ever force to bomb Dortmund, and up until that time. And we do know that 5 Wellingtons and 4 Hamdens were among those that were lost that night. They probably had something like this. This is obviously a painting, but they probably did have huge searchlights coming up from the ground. And I guess if you were trapped in the searchlights, you were probably going to be shot down by the anti-aircraft device, flak batteries from the ground with not that much difficulty. And it must have been, for the crew on board, completely terrifying. I've got an eyewitness report from which Christoph kindly sent me, a local German called Willi Holter, who lived near the crash site, where it says this: it was the night of the 15th of April, 1942, and a Wellington bomber crashed. The air raid alarms had become a habit, and we didn't always get up for them. This is also the case that night when the bedroom was lit up by spotlights, and the flak was especially robust. I went to the window and saw a Wellington circling low, picked out in the spotlight. The plane had already been hit. She eventually went into a steep glide and struck the ground in a ball of fire. We saw the flames around the fuselage. The aircraft had exploded on impact. The debris flew towards Unterbrucherstrasse and the farm of Jacob Nilgis. The plane was definitely on its way back to England and had no bombs on board. But due to the exploding fuel, burning parts flew into the house of Nilgis and set it on fire, which then burned to the ground. The heavy plane engines lay in the direction of the village to the right of the road. This is not actually the crash, but I suspect it looked something like that, a terrible wreckage from which nobody was going to escape. And on the crew were Sergeant Pilot Winkle, our friend Andrew Downey, Pilot Officer Observer, age 21, a lovely inscription on his grave: "To live in the hearts of those we love is not to die." There was a Sergeant Strang from Grangemouth, which is about 30 miles from where I'm sitting. "Sweet are the memories silently kept of one we loved and never forget." There was Sergeant Barker from Essex. And then interestingly, there was a Dutch gentleman called Jean-Jacques Gabriel Hall, who was a sergeant. He might be a dual national, I don't know, with a surname like Hall. I suspect Dad was, I don't know this, but Dad was, and this is what Christoph's looking at, Dad might have been a British person and Mum might have been Dutch, I don't know. He died for freedom and right. So that was the crew on board. And full marks to the German population. And Christoph, I think we all owe you and your fellow population real full marks for this, because the Germans on the ground erected temporary graves for the crew of this bomber. And you can see how beautifully they've done them, with nice crosses, with flowers laid. And this is from people who were trying to bomb the heck out of them. I think that was an amazing act of humanity that the German people on the ground, despite the fact that this bomber was coming in an act of massive aggression, nonetheless gave our crew a decent and Christian burial. It wasn't, just to read this little bit from the local Kinross Advertiser. You remember I told you that Andrew's dad was the local postie. 4 days after the crash, and it shows you how slow things moved in those days, this little extract was published in the local Kinross newspaper, reporting that basically the postie's son was missing on an operational flight, causing deep anxiety and concern, because there was no more popular lad in the town than Andrew. He's 21 years of age and had a brilliant school career. I'm afraid to say he'd been killed 4 days before that was actually published. So that's a very interesting bit of historical memorabilia. 2 years later, those graves were moved to the huge Reichswald Forest War Cemetery, which a lot of you will know, where an awful lot of RAF crew and bomber crews were actually buried, just on the Dutch-German border. A very large beautiful Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery with, you know, the normal sort of hundreds of immaculately kept graves there. And that's where Andrew and his crew are buried. They're all in one long line, and here's his 4 crew chums. You can see Winkle, Strang, Barker, and Hall there. And then together in that line is Andrew himself, who I showed you earlier. Beautifully kept, immaculately kept. So just a little note on Bomber Command, a little historical note, and these statistics, which I looked up, completely horrified me. I knew it was big, but I guess I didn't know it was as big as this. 364,000 operational sorties, over 8,000 aircraft lost in action. And these terrifying statistics of a 46% death rate from 125,000 aircrew, 57,000 were killed, a further 8,000 plus wounded, and over 9,000 becoming prisoners of war from Bomber Command. Massive. Now to really complete the detective story, and I told you that Christoph from Germany, from Village, had said, is there any way of tracking down any living members of the family of Andrew, one of the crew? And my friend David Munro is a great local historian here, said, well, why don't you try, I think his name is Margaret, and she lives just in this street, and I think she might have something to do with this. Lo and behold, we found Andrew's sister, Margaret, who's now 88, a wonderful, tough, fit, spiky woman, terrific lady who's Andrew's sister. She also worked in general accident and then went into the post office like her father. She's married to Bill, who's still alive. He's an ex-National Service Cameron Highlander, who then became the Kinross Butcher. fantastic walker. Whenever you go anywhere in Kinross, there's Bill walking the pavements. He's as fit as a butcher's dog, as Boris said the other day. And they've lived in Kinross for 60 years. But for 25 years running, Margaret and Bill visited Bill's grave, not Bill, Andrew's grave in the Reichsfeld. And a little bit, first of all, when the Legion were helping with those tours, and then on their own. She's been very moved by the whole story, and she's got a whole wodge of memorabilia. And she took a long and lovely telephone call from Christoph only last week. This is what Margaret said. Just a picture, first of all, of Margaret with the, do you remember I showed you the trophy that her brother won for being the best bomb aimer on the course and best observer? And she sits proudly with that in her back garden with that trophy. And this is what Margaret said the other day.
It's been an amazing feeling to be in touch with someone from the German town where my dear brother Andrew was killed all those years ago. I was just 9 years old, yet Andrew was my hero, and his loss hit us all very hard. Now we are all in the middle of another almost wartime experience with a different sort of foe to fight. My generation is used to hardship and challenges, so we'll win this one eventually, never fear. I am so grateful to Christoph in Germany for taking an interest in us, wanting to find us, and in honouring my brother's memory. Danke schön. I hope he comes to visit us and he will be made most welcome. He is a craft brewer and we would like him to try some of ours at Lochleven Brewery.
I'd like to conclude by thanking Andrew for his sacrifice and his crew and the thousands of other from Bomber Command who went on those operational sorties. Whatever the rights and wrongs are, looking back now, these young men and on the other side gave their lives for us. So, Andrew, we salute you and we thank you. You're not forgotten. Your sister here, Margaret, still loves you and recalls you. Bless you. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm saluting Andrew now.
Thank you. We've got Christoph on the call. Do you want me to add him in?
Yes. Christoph, if you'd like to, Amy's going to unmute you. And Christoph, who's joining us from Germany, if you'd like to just maybe say a couple of words about what your project's about and what it's meant to you so far.
Yeah, okay, sure. Thanks. Great to see you all.
And you, Christoph.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm still in my working clothes. As
okay.
Was told, I started a little brewery with some friends, so I just came back from delivering beer.
Send some over here, please.
So I studied history in Düsseldorf and Prague, and so that's why I was reading something about local history during the beginning of the Corona crisis. So I had a lot of time, was sitting at home and thought, okay, you could start reading a bit about local history again. And then I found out, or I read that part about that bomber that crashed in midst of April, really just a few hundred meters from my home place away. And I remember that my grandmother, she lived as a kid next to the graveyard. She once told me about that British pilots were laid to rest with all full military honors in the beginning of the war. And so it rang some bell inside my head, and then I said, okay, I want to find out more. And it was on the 13th of April. And then I thought, okay, it would be nice to go to the grave, which is now on the Reichswald Cemetery on the date. And so I went to Kleve to visit the graves. And so it took me in that I just wanted to find out more, and I'm still looking for more information, more and more. So just on Wednesday, I was in Dortmund in the city's archives to find out more about the bombing raid on Dortmund that night. So I was totally surprised to find still people living in this area here which can remember that night and the crash. They were kids, obviously, at that time, but they still remember pretty good and a lot of things. And I was totally moved that when Andy helped me so my only hope was I wanted to find something out about these 5 young guys, because I think so it's now for me just a name, or it was just a name and a number, but I want to find out what people there were, so from the midst of their lives. And I was hoping to find maybe a niece or something of them who can say, yeah, my father or my mother always told me about that uncle I had, but I never expected to find someone like a sister still living, because it's 78 years ago, and it totally moved me. And especially I'm so thankful that Andrew is obviously the one I got most about. So I got also some stuff about the pilots, Peter Fitzpatrick Vane Winkle, but he was a only child, so no relatives. I only got things from the archives, and something from the newspaper about him. But I'm so happy that it's Andrew I found out most about, because it's yeah, Andy, you told that he was one of the awarded as one of the best bombing, so that bombing school
student.
Sorry for my English. And so it makes it even harder or more horrible that he was killed in his first flight to Germany. And so that's but it's something that also shows how much that bombing, so you could be the best, but it's just luck. You are lucky to return, or if you're not lucky, that has nothing to do with your abilities, or not that much as in other in other branches.
Well, I'd just like to thank you, Christoph, for having opened this door for us, because it has been fascinating, and it just shows you that really how far we've traveled since 1942, really. And I've spent a lot of time in Germany, serving in Germany, and loving serving in Germany. And now most of the British Army of the Rhine has come home, and most of the I think all of the RAF bases have closed there. But we are now all friends, and I can't tell you how much it's meant to Margaret, Andrew's sister, to have found you, and for her to have rediscovered all the stories. So one day, Christoph, when we're allowed to, I'm sure you'll come to Kinross, and you'll bring a lot of your beer with you. And we can have a little party and celebrate. But Dankeschön to you. Thank you very much, Amy. I think if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. No, I'm not an RAF expert.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Christoph, for joining us. We've not had any questions, just some really nice comments here. There was a comment, RAF commissions are usually given to university graduates, so hopefully, Andy, that might help with that question earlier. Steve says, brilliant presentation, many thanks, brought it here. And Jeff says, what a brilliant session, humanity to both of them, big thanks.
Thank you.
So loads of really nice comments.
Amy, would you kindly unmute my brother, Paul Middlemiss, for a second?
I can certainly try. There
Paul,
you go, sir.
Paul might just want to say, Paul, if you've got a minute, just get your best German out and have a word with Christoph. Just a sentence or two.
He should be able to.
He's probably in his pajamas.
Can I? No, no, no. Can I do that now?
Yeah, go ahead now.
All right. Also schließlich und endlich, Christoph, darf ich sagen, dass für mich ein großes Vergnügen, dich schließlich kennenzulernen. Ich habe viel von dir gehört, von meinem Bruder, und dein Gesicht endlich bei meinem Screen zu sehen, ist für mich ein Vergnügen und eine große Ehre. So vielen Dank.
Well done, Paul. You haven't lost your touch.
And that's just off the cuff, Andy. That wasn't written down or rehearsed.
I know. I just thought I'd ambush you.
Vielen Dank und yeah, you're welcome.
And make sure you do bring the beer with you.
Promise.
Christoph, marks out of 10 for Paul's German.
A 10. It's
Oh, very good.
pretty good.
Thank you
Thank
all
you,
very
Andy.
much for joining us. Thank you, Andy, for a brilliant presentation.
My
Christoph,
pleasure.
thank you for opening this door for us. Paul, brilliant German, I'm sure. I think, probably. But thank you all for joining us. Have a lovely rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And thank you. Cheers,
Thanks,
everyone.
Amy. Thanks for
Bye.
putting it together.
Bye.